This story is from Reddit user Dylan with Fear Altoona, Pennsylvania. I was a single mother in my mid-40s and had just moved to a new house with my then 4-year-old son back in 2002 when we were both living in our hometown of Altoona, Pennsylvania. We had only been there for a few weeks when one late night there was a knock on our front door. My son was asleep on the couch and I was still up unpacking and putting things away. I pulled the curtain aside and looked out to see a petite young woman standing and shivering in our porch. Our front door had a chain latch attached to it, so I kept it on as I opened the door only as far as the latch would allow. Then I asked her what she wanted. She said she had locked herself out of the house and asked if she could come in and use the phone. I asked her where she lived, and she described an address of a house about a block and around the corner. She would have had to have passed at least a dozen of houses, which I noticed had their porch lights on, and there was also a still operational payphone across the street. Alarm bells in my head were going off about this. With my young son asleep in our living room, I was reluctant to let her in, but it was a chilly winter night, so I offered a code and my cellular phone, which I handed off to her through the doorway. She took my coat and my phone, then called someone but walked to the other end of the porch where I couldn't hear her, so I closed the door after I told her to put the phone in the mailbox when she was done and to bring my coat back tomorrow. She left the phone but never returned my coat. For several weeks, I got strange phone calls at all hours. People on the end of those calls were demanding to know where I was when I answered, or simply hung up. Approximately 2 to 3 months later, I was reading the front page of Altoona's local newspaper. Then I found a photo of the young woman who had knocked at our door that night. She and 10 other suspects had been arrested in a major drug bust. I immediately got chills thinking back on that cold winter night. How she showed up in a sleeveless shirt after passing several homes in the neighborhood. I wonder what might have happened to me and my young son if I had ignored my unease and my suspicions in spite of her seemingly helpless appearance. This story is from Reddit user EvenFennel7962. I think I witnessed a real possession as a kid. This happened when I was 9 years old, living with my mother in a small apartment above a pizza shop. The building was 1800s era and had very eccentric old designs, such as doors made of very rough unfinished wood, and a creepy attic, of course. The door to it being inside poor kid me's bedroom. I was a strange kid, and usually hid in my bedroom or on the couch, on my laptop. I also had an interest in the paranormal, so I had things like a Ouija board, video camera, the kind that recorded onto CDs, and more tools to try and go ghost hunting. The possession is the true conclusion to the story I'm going to tell. Many different events lead up to this scary, borderline traumatizing event for me. Scary, bizarre things happened daily in this apartment. To list a few, the old wooden attic would frequently slam open. We would hear voices at night, people coming up our apartment stairs, and more. My mom even installed a lock on the outside of the attic door to make me feel safer. Unfortunately, it only scared me more when I'd hear the chain lock slide open and the old wood door creak, letting a cool breeze into my bedroom. I will keep this story brief and gird on with the more serious happenings, starting with our cat, Gemini. We had a lovely cat who was small enough to fit through a rotted hole in the attic door and often wandered up there on her own. We made sure nothing unsafe was up there, like rat bait or anything, and even put a cat tree up there for her. It made me feel a little better, thinking that the noises in the attic could just be the cat. Gemini went missing for a while, but we still heard noises in the attic, so we assumed she was just hiding. After about 5 days of not seeing her, my mom found her long, decomposing corpse in the attic, directly in front of the stairs. We got another cat. The next incident still shakes me to this day. My mom would frequently walk from our apartment to the next door convenience store to grab some quick food. One day, she went out to grab some things, and I waited in my room. About 5 minutes later, I heard her coming up the stairs with a heavy gait, like she was carrying somethings, and yelled to me, "OP, come help out." It was unmistakably her. I leave my room and prepare to put some stuff away just to find a completely empty apartment. No one was here. My mom arrived about 5 minutes later and was really scared by what I told her had happened. It was absolutely her voice and her footsteps. I wish it was a prank, but the same thing happened again weeks later. Me and my mom were in the living room together. She had been dating this guy who would often come by and visit spontaneously. We both heard him coming up to our apartment and yell up, "Hey girls, want to grab some food?" Or something to that extent. Me and my mom both got up to greet him just to find no one. I know you might be thinking it's noise from the pizza store below, but it always had the exact voice, slang, and said phrases the person would say regularly. The way the voices resonated was definitely not from below the apartment. It was in the apartment. I had an Ouija board, as any curious kid would back then. I made my mom play with me, even though we only had 2 people, which wasn't technically enough. Some normal Ouija board things happened. However, at one point, the piece literally flew across the whole living room with immense force. I know that is so stereotypical, but that's just what happened. My mom made me burn the Ouija board in a campfire not long after that. Our new cat eventually became pregnant by a stray. I found her giving birth in the attic and called my mom up eagerly to come see. We were both watching the kittens when I heard the attic door shut and the chain lock slide. My mom then began seizing intensely, and I was absolutely horrified. I had no idea what to do at that age, so I called my best friend on my LG Rumor cell phone and said my mom was dying and I need help. They called an ambulance for us. My mom woke up before they arrived and had this angry, scary expression and was slurring her words, but she was almost growling every word and said, "I'm a curse." It sounded like. EMTs arrived and I went to go meet them, but found that I was locked in the attic with my scary mom. I called my friend again in a total panic, and they told the EMTs to come into the attic. They took basic vitals and left. I don't know if it was my mother playing up some strange but explainable events in the house, maybe faking the Ouija incident, but these memories really irk me to this day. Maybe that was a normal seizure. Some things are explainable, but so many are not. How did the attic door lock us in? How on earth were the voices of people we knew being heard in the house, calling to us? I wrote this while exhausted from work, so forgive the writing etiquette. I just wanted to share this story on here as I've shared with many others before. This story is from Reddit user StatusStrawberry12, the man who knocked on the front door. Back when I, male 18, graduated in 2021, I wanted to take a gap year, as much as you can take one in America, to focus on myself after the pandemic and online school stress. My godfather had also passed away while visiting us due to hospital malpractice, so I'm already in a lot of grief and staying inside more than ever. My brother, male 25, was working at Petco and met a sweet old lady that needed a dog sitter. I ended up getting an interview to dog sit. As a dog owner, I had a lot of experience caring for dogs. I should have left the second she told me my worth was only $2 an hour, that she'd pay bi-weekly, because she could pay anyone to dog sit for $10 an hour. I reluctantly accepted as it was a job that she insisted I stayed at for over 12 hours a day. I always think about how much I could have made if I just knew my worth. Anyways, as the interview went on, she brought up this ex-roommate of hers that she had kicked out in a heated argument. She told me, "If anyone knocks on that door, do not let them in. Lock the door every day when you first get in and only open it for me." Obviously, this terrified me, but my people-pleasing kicked in and I felt entitled to caring for this sweet old lady. The job was fun. I got up early, she was really chill, and I only needed to walk/feed the dogs twice a day. This lady was obviously very lonely, as she had this giant house with a lot of food, just for her and her dogs. And the dogs didn't get much. She insisted I feed them boiled chicken from this pot I had to reboil every day. The rest of the day I had a 3,000 square foot clean house with 3 bedrooms and nobody to bother me for 12 hours in a day. Didn't have to worry about my home life and thought nothing could go bad. But I was wrong. What happened next horrifies me to this day. This story is from Reddit user StatusStrawberry12, the man who knocked on the front door, part 2. For a good 2, maybe 3 months, everything seemed to be going fine. But at the back of my head, I always had a lingering fear about her ex-roommate. One day I come in and everything's normal, but I got this weird feeling that I shouldn't go outside with the dogs yet. I'm also physically disabled, and it's very taxing on my body. But then it happened. Tap, tap, tap at the front door. Weird, the male people don't usually knock. Tap, tap, tap. I yell, "Leave the box at the front door, please." But then my heart sank. "Hello? Can you let me in?" I look over and this tall, lanky white man with a weirdly cut toupee and icy blue eyes is looking straight at me in the window. Tap, tap, tap. "Hey, I'm not gonna hurt you, please, I just have a package." I tried to ignore him and told him I don't know him, and he needs to go away. "Oh no, I'm not a bad person, my friend is your boss." My heart skips a beat as I notice this is the exact incident she was talking about. But he wouldn't leave. He told me he just needs to come in for a second and begins to walk to the back, and so I told him, "I'll call 911 if he leaves that spot." He very calmly chuckles and goes, "Wow there, it's all right, buddy. I just need my MyPillow. It's in the other room, only I know where it is." I tried reasoning with him, but he wouldn't leave, so I called the dog sitter lady. She picks up and I tell her that he's breaking in, and like the great boss she was, she tells me to just not let him in and don't trust him, while at the same time trying to act like he's harmless. She tells me she'll be getting off at 3, which is the earliest she can, which was in 4 hours, so I call my dad. My dad is able to square up with the guy and yell at him. The man slowly creeps by him until my dad says, "Back the fuck up, dude, I will beat your ass." The guy luckily took that as a sign and ran off, but said he'd be back for his MyPillow. At that point I just left, and thank God, me, my dad, and the dogs weren't hurt. And I wish I could say that was the end of my time there, but it wasn't. But that's a story for another time. This story is from Reddit user Call My Bluff. Something told me to go. I grew up in southwest Saskatchewan and moved onto my aunt's farm in 2019 to live in the other house that is on their property. The house is fairly old, but I loved it. It wasn't long after I moved in, though, that I started to feel uneasy in the house alone. I would close every window when it got dark, as it felt like something was watching me through them every night. Eventually, I decided to get a puppy to keep myself company when my boyfriend at the time was at work or away from the house. It helped to have the company, but I always dreaded having to take her outside when it was dark. For a bit of scene setting, our house sat on the left side of the gravel road. At the back of the house there was about 10 meters of backyard, and then there was the cow pasture and the cow barn. We didn't own cows, but in the summer, another farmer would rent our pasture space, so we would have them on the property. It wasn't uncommon at night to hear coyotes surround the farm either, and there were tons. Every so often when I'd go out with my puppy, we'd hear them all around us, too close for comfort. We had a farm dog too who would keep the coyotes away for the most part, as she was huge, but every so often she'd wander elsewhere on the property to scout, and the coyotes would get a little too close for comfort. They always tried to lure my puppy out to them, but luckily I kept her leashed. Now, one thing you should know about my pup is that it takes her forever to find a spot to go potty. This is still a problem today, 4 years later, but back then it was the bane of my existence. She would pace for at least 5 minutes, and that was only after finding a suitable spot. Sometimes we would be out there for damn near a half hour, just so she would go, and not go in the house. Another problem of hers. Huskies, am I right? On this particular night, it was raining pretty heavily. I was not happy to be out there, and she had decided that she wasn't going to go until she found her perfect spot. We had already been out for 15 minutes, and at this point, she was also getting frustrated with the rain and wanted to go inside. But I wanted her to go before we went in since we'd already been out there for so long. So as any annoyed puppy mother would do, I started getting a little frustrated and would repeat, "Go, go, potty," every time she'd get distracted from her objective. It was dark, I was cold and annoyed, and to make matters worse, the cows behind us were fussing fairly loudly. This was out of the ordinary for them. They were usually quiet and sleeping at this time of night. I also heard what sounded like a strange bird whistling, but shook it off as probably being an owl. I tried to keep it off my mind as I kept shouting and pleading "go" through the rain to my small fuzzy white asshole. I was facing away from the pasture, and suddenly in my left ear, I heard it. Go. Now, one thing you should know about me is that I have a very strong flight response typically, but this froze me on the spot, as I was mostly confused at WTF I'd just heard. I tried telling myself I didn't hear it. I tried telling myself that it was just a moo from a cow that I heard wrong, but again, as if spoken directly behind me, I heard it. Go, go. It sounded a natural. It was as if it came from someone who had never spoken a word before. A raspy, deep, monotone, go. It almost sounded like it was coming out of an old radio, but of course there were no radios out there. Every time it said it, it sounded the same as the first time it was said. And whatever it was, had started repeating it as if it had been taught its new favorite word. At this point, I spun around to the pasture to find nothing there. Then, again from behind me, go. This had all happened in the span of about 3 seconds, and at this point, I remember shouting out loud, "All right, don't have to tell me twice," as I picked up my little furball and made a mad dash for my front door. I swiftly locked both doors behind me and sat bewildered in my kitchen. Puppy went back to puppying immediately, obviously unbothered by it all, and happy Mum wasn't making her stay out in the rain any longer. I picked up my phone and called my aunt, asking her if my uncle had been out in the field with the cows. She said no, and I explained to her what had just happened to me. She sent my uncle over to the pasture to check it out, but soon after told me he hadn't seen or heard anything. He said he'd check the pasture again in the morning. I spent my night hiding from the windows with the lights and TV on loud enough to not hear anything outside. This story is from Reddit user Glitter Fresh Gore. An odd creature spotted in the late 1990s Connecticut. I'll try my best to recall this story that just popped into my memory randomly. This would have been in the late 90s in Connecticut, maybe about 1998. I was a teenager and some of my friends had started getting driver's licenses, so we did what any teen in the 90s did: drive around with our friends looking for something to do in a small town. There were about 5 of us in a friend's car. I wasn't driving, I was on the passenger side in the back seat. We were riding around listening to music and talking. No substances were used. We were on a wooded, windy road at night. Suddenly, the driver slammed on her brakes and we watched as this creature crossed in front of us. Illuminated by the headlights, the creature was about toddler height, very, very pale, no clothing, bald, very slender. It paused briefly to look at us. I remember we all got dead silent. It passed the road quickly and went into the woods. It walked on 2 legs. It was most certainly not an animal I'd ever seen, especially since it was bipedal, and it wasn't a little kid. The only thing I can't recall is its face. I did see the creature, but from my seat in the car, my view was slightly obstructed. We were all silent for a few moments, processing what we'd seen. I remember another passenger whispered, "Dude, what the fuck?" We continued in silence with the occasional, "Did you fucking see that thing?" We kept the radio off at that point, and the driver started bringing us all to our homes. We were so creeped out, we didn't feel like having fun anymore. One of our friends nicknamed it El Chalupa, so occasionally we'd bring it up. I've lost touch with all of them at this point. I'm in my 40s now. But we never did find out what we saw. This was before most of us had even home computers, let alone a cell phone or Google. Any ideas?